Jesus is our God, a bulwark never failing. Our helper, he amidst the flood of mortal ills prevailing. For still our ancient foe does seek to work us woe. His craft and power are great, and armed with cruel hate. On earth is not his equal. Did we in our own strength confide, our striving would be losing. Were not the right man on our side, the man of God's own choosing. Disguised who that may be, Christ Jesus, it is he, the Lord of hosts, his name, from age to age the same. And he must win the battle. And though this world with devils filled should threaten to undo us, we will not fear, for God hath willed his truth to triumph through us. The prince of darkness grim, we tremble not for him. His rage we can endure, for lo, his doom is sure. One little word shall fill him. A mighty fortress, a rock unfailing, the King of glory forever. Amen. For endless ages, enthroned in praises, the King of glory forever. Amen. That word above all earthly powers, no thanks to them abideth. The Spirit and the gifts are ours through him who with us sideth. Let goods and kindred go, this mortal life also. The body they may kill, God's truth abideth still. His kingdom is forever. It's forever and ever. A mighty fortress, a rock unfailing, the King of glory forever. Amen. For endless ages, enthroned in praises, the King of glory forever. Amen. A mighty fortress, a rock unfailing, the King of glory forever. Amen. For endless ages, enthroned in praises, the King of glory forever, forever. Amen.
Welcome back to chapel. This is our final chapel for the school year, and before we continue, I should say a hearty congratulations to all of our seniors. It'll be really exciting to see what God has in store for each of you in the future. As you know, the school year is coming to an end. But for many of us, we're still dealing with the impact of the coronavirus pandemic. We're still wrestling with the uncertainties of what the future will look like. And we're still facing questions that don't appear to have answers. And into this chaos speak the final group of psalms that we're going to be examining. The Psalms of Confidence, or Psalms of Trust, are named such because they express a trust in God in the midst of chaos. Now notice that I didn't say a trust that God will bring them out of the chaos, but a trust that God will be with them in the midst of the chaos. Probably the most famous and the most well-known of the Psalms of Confidence is Psalm 46, and that's the one we're going to be looking at today. Psalm 46 is the inspiration for Martin Luther, or was the inspiration for Martin Luther, in writing his famous hymn, "A Mighty Fortress is Our God." Let me read Psalm 46 for you, and then we will unpack it. God is our refuge and strength, an ever-present help in trouble. Therefore we will not fear, though the earth give way and the mountains fall into the heart of the sea, though its waters roar and foam, and the mountains quake with their surging. There is a river whose streams make glad the city of God, the holy place where the Most High dwells. God is within her; she will not fall. God will help her at break of day. Nations are in uproar; kingdoms fall. He lifts his voice; the earth melts. The Lord Almighty is with us; the God of Jacob is our fortress. Come and see what the Lord has done, the desolations he has brought on the earth. He makes wars cease to the ends of the earth. He breaks the bow and shatters the spear. He burns the shields with fire. He says, "Be still, and know that I am God. I will be exalted among the nations. I will be exalted in the earth. The Lord Almighty, or the Lord of hosts, is with us. The God of Jacob is our fortress," or our refuge. This particular psalm breaks down fairly easily into two different sections, both ending with the refrain, "The Lord Almighty, or the Lord of hosts, is with us. The God of Jacob is our fortress," or our refuge. The first section, verses 1 through 6, we see that God is with his people when their world is falling to pieces. There's powerful language here that the psalmist uses. It says, "We will not fear, though the earth give way, though the mountains fall into the heart of the sea, though the waters roar and foam and the mountains quake with surging." And there's powerful imagery here about the entire earth being in chaos, that things are turned upside down, if you like. But notice here the psalmist says, in the midst of that, we will not fear. In the midst of the chaos, we will not fear. Notice also the psalmist says, in the midst of the chaos, there's a river. There's a river whose streams make glad the city of God. And so the psalmist says, in the midst of chaos, when life is falling to pieces, there's hope, there's security, there's peace, there's gladness. But where does that come from? He says it comes from the presence of God. God is our refuge and strength, a very present help in trouble. There's a river whose streams make glad the city of God, the holy habitation of the Most High. God is in the midst of the city. God will help it. The Lord of hosts, or the Lord Almighty, is with us. The God of Jacob is our fortress. And so notice here that the psalmist says that it's the presence of God that brings security and peace in the midst of the chaos. In the midst of the psalmist's world falling to pieces, it's the presence of God which brings security. It's the presence of God which anchors him. It's the presence of God which brings hope when life is falling to pieces. And we see very similar things when we turn to the New Testament. For example, we see in Mark chapter 4 when Jesus calms a storm. If you remember, Jesus is asleep in the boat, and the disciples come and they wake him up, and they want him to do something. So Jesus gets up, and he says, "Peace, be still." And the winds stop, and the waves cease, and it was totally calm. Now it's interesting because you may be familiar with another story in the Bible where there is someone on a boat in a storm asleep. You're probably thinking of the story of Jonah, and you would be right. If you remember in the story of Jonah, he's asleep on the boat, he's running from God actually, and he's asleep on the boat in the midst of a storm. And the sailors come and they wake him, and eventually they discover the only way to stop the storm is by throwing Jonah overboard. And when they do, the storm ceases. But notice the contrast here with Jesus in the New Testament. That Jesus doesn't have to be thrown overboard. Jesus just speaks. Jesus is able to stop the storm on his own. In Jonah's story, it's God who stops the storm. In Jesus' story, it's God who stops the storm. And this is why the disciples respond to Jesus after this happens. They said, "What sort of man is this, that even the winds and the sea obey him?" They know what's going on. That the only one that can stop chaos is God. And Jesus just stopped chaos. Or you may also be familiar with the story in Revelation of John's vision of the throne in Revelation chapter 4. In Revelation 4, we see here in verse 6, in front of the throne there was something like a sea of glass, like crystal. This is interesting. It says like a sea of glass. And the imagery here that John is using is extremely powerful. Because in an ancient mindset, and honestly to many of us today too, the sea is a place of chaos. It's a scary place. It isn't fun to be out in the middle of the sea with a storm raging. Many in the ancient world thought it was a place of sea monsters or maybe even the realm of the dead. Notice here in Revelation that around the throne, the sea is totally still. I don't know if you've ever been to a lake or on a river that's totally still. There's no wind moving or anything, and you can see it like a mirror reflection of the trees that are growing up near the river. And that's how it says it is around the throne. In other words, there's no chaos. There's nothing to fear. In the presence of God, there is peace and security. The sea is so calm. This place of chaos, this place that is untamable by humans. This place is totally calm in the presence of God. And so the psalmist here in Psalm 46 says something very similar. That God is our refuge and strength, a very present help in trouble. That it's the presence of God that brings peace and brings security in the midst of chaos, in the midst of uncertainty, in the midst of questions that don't seem like they have answers. So that's the first section, again ending with the refrain, the Lord of hosts is with us, or the Lord Almighty is with us, the God of Jacob is our fortress. The second section then, in verses 8 through 10, we find this discussion, this depiction of God as a divine warrior. If you like, the first section, we could say, ends with the question, there's peace and security in the presence of God, but why? And the second section answers that question. Because the divine warrior fights on behalf of his people. Notice here in verse 8 through 11, or 8 through 10, come behold the works of the Lord, see what desolations he has brought on the earth. He makes wars to cease. He breaks the bow, shatters the spear, burns the shields, or some translations say chariots, with fire. Be still and know that I am God. I will be exalted among the nations. I am exalted in the earth. So not only does the divine warrior make wars to cease, stops the chaos, but he also commands the nations to stop warring. Be still, he says. Or some translations say, cease striving and know that I am God. And he can speak this way because he's the Almighty. Yahweh is the one that rules over all. And as the one who rules over all, he has the power, he has the authority to speak peace in the midst of chaos. To speak peace in the midst of warring. To speak peace in the midst of uncertainty, in the midst of doubt, in the midst of confusion, when things have been turned upside down. And it makes me think about the particular wars that you and I might be facing. Wars against fear, wars against guilt, wars against uncertainty, wars against an unknown future. But this psalm calls us to rest in the security that comes from the Lord Almighty, the divine warrior. And it calls us to trust in that security. And it calls us to say, let God fight for you. Let the divine warrior fight on your behalf. Let the divine warrior fight your battle for you. Let his strength, let his power, let his authority be what brings you through. Psalm 46 ends again with the refrain, the Lord of hosts, the Lord Almighty is with us. The God of Jacob is our fortress. So as we look to the future, there's much that remains unclear. There's much that remains uncertain. But Psalm 46 reminds us that difficulties, questions, chaos will come. But we can rest in Yahweh. We can rest in God. We can rest in the security that comes from his presence. The peace that comes from knowing that he rules over all. The hope that comes